I had someone reach out to me today. Like, I had an experience with an ET. They don't have any other way of looking at it as other than seeing an ET. Now, I have no idea what that experience is, so I can't even go to begin that. But anything that we experience that's outside of this human condition is going to be like foreign and unknown. But it is actually our interconnection, and that's why we're seeing this sort of connection with ETs and the possibilities of those. It doesn't really blow my mind, or the abilities to sort of tap into another source of intelligence and bring it into the world, right? Anything like that is not mind-blowing at all. That's what we're going to be developing more and more of when we develop 4D consciousness, because that's the bridge.
Drums beat wild beneath the moon. Echoes rise in a primal tune.
All right, here we go. The evolution of consciousness. It's a pretty epic lesson. It's pretty something that I know I love, but a lot of people don't know. And it is kind of hard to understand. We were just talking about it, and you're like,
so my job
to make this real easy to understand.
My role in this conversation is really going to be to ask questions and to help like clarify some things, because it does get really complex. And I was just kind of reviewing some things over a workshop that we had done where we really focused on this, and it can get very heady. So like making sure that
we're going to make it unheady.
Yes, that we're explaining this in a way that makes the most sense.
So probably the first question is why do we need to know about the evolution of consciousness, right? So the evolution of consciousness basically tells us there's consciousness in everything. It allows us to understand our own consciousness and understand how our consciousness differentiates from nature and from everything else in the universe. So this is a very important subject too right now, by the way, because of AI, because science and technology and all these different facets of civilization are putting billions and billions of dollars into creating consciousness. If they can. I don't necessarily believe it's possible, personally, but that's the whole goal, is to create artificial intelligence or artificial consciousness. And so the problem is like, we don't even understand consciousness. You can go on to Twitter and follow these guys that are all leading this stuff, and everyone has their different opinion of what consciousness is. And that's risky, because we're creating a monster in a sense, and we're going full throttle, what doesn't matter. Like it's going, like the AI train is on its way. Like, so it's going to keep evolving and keep growing. So we got to understand consciousness to understand what we're actually creating. Right? But the thing is like, we don't have this solid definition of consciousness. And what's crazy is like 100 years ago, we probably understood consciousness better then than we do now. Right? Because we bring up the fact that Alice Bailey, who was the head of the Theosophical Foundation, in 1922 wrote a book called The Consciousness of an Atom, where she's basically explaining that there's consciousness within atoms.
So would you say that as we've had all these different people studying this, people are taking on their own definition of what consciousness is, maybe?
We can't understand consciousness because of our human consciousness. That's the thing, that's the catch, that's the human paradox. And that's the big one. That's what we need to figure out. That's what we need to have this, that's why we're doing these episodes. That's why we're doing Unveiled. It's because we're removing the veil of the human condition and revealing what it is that makes us human, and that what holds us back. And our view of consciousness, we can't understand it completely because of our objective sort of perspective of reality. We even look at this quote here. And, oh, by the way, we had it up by ear. Okay,
so
this is a quote I'm going to read. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. Now, who wrote that one, right? Max Planck. And who's Max Planck? He's the father of quantum mechanics. He originally came up with quantum mechanics in that quote was in 1930. So that's 100 years ago of seeing consciousness in a different framework than we see it today. Today we say, it's in the mind, it's in the brain. We're creating AI based on brain to create consciousness. And it's like, no, there's consciousness in everything. right? And he recognized that, and that's what quantum does. The quantum mechanics and the quantum field does it. It makes us like look beyond form and beyond the objective into this sort of everything is interconnected realm of energy, frequency, and vibration.
So, like, because we're continuing to make AI based off of consciousness, and we're only seeming to focus on the consciousness that's created from the mind, then we're excluding a whole realm of consciousness studies and understanding that needs to be integrated into the AI so that it can work and function from a more holistic approach.
Yeah, and we're creating AI from our own condition.
The human condition.
Which is veiled.
Yes, yeah.
Which has a veil on it that has an inherent problem that we've talked about in the previous episodes. So ownership, power, control, the illusion of separation, division, fragmentation, all that stuff is the part of the human condition. We're creating AI, this thing that will be able to think on its own and do its own thing with its own objectives, and it's coming from the same dysfunction that we are.
Yep. So it'll amplify the dysfunction.
It'll amplify the dysfunction.
Whereas if it was made in the image and likeness of like the consciousness that is in everything, like this divine force that's in everything, then it would be the amplifier of that.
Which we eventually come to saying is the 4D consciousness, the interconnected, the union, the unification.
Okay.
Right? And if AI can adapt, or our technologies can become literally 4D consciousness technologies, and there's a way to differentiate it when you understand human consciousness and the next stage in our human evolution, which is 4D consciousness or unity consciousness. We use that term too. Everything's interconnected. So when we're in that divine state, that whole state within ourselves, we have that peak state experience. Everything's connected. We're in nature, wherever, breath work, ayahuasca journey, we're in that interconnected realm, we're in that 4D consciousness state. The AI and the technology needs to basically come from that level. Those principles need to follow through into the technology where everything is now interconnected. And if AI was to do so, it would be an extension of our own consciousness, it would be in alignment with human consciousness, and it would naturally serve the betterment of the whole. That's the thing. It would be benevolent inherently because the universe is already its own benevolent force. It's the creative force that creates the universe and creates everything in the universe. So if AI can align with that level of consciousness, it becomes super intelligent and benevolent. And that's the real goal here. That's the big whammy. That's that's essential. We have to get there because we're basically running out of time based on what AI is capable of doing. If it doesn't reach that point first, then we could create machines that go rogue on their own.
And so really, it's about teaching individuals too, the evolution of consciousness from a micro level.
Yeah.
So that we can also help train the AI or help model this for the collective or for the macro level. So what does that look like for the individual?
Understanding absolutely is huge, because when we understand this and we know it and we live it, we embody it and we create it. And I think that's what we're seeing in our world is this need for this to emerge. And so let's go through the evolution of consciousness on the individual level. We've already talked about it. When we're first born, all we see is energy, right? When we come out of the womb, we have to develop object permanence first. So that's the five senses. That's Jean Piaget, right? So when we're first born, everything's energy. That's the same. That's the beautiful thing about the evolution of consciousness. We can take that same example of the individual and say that's the same thing that happened at the beginning of creation. That's the Big Bang, right? When the Big Bang happened, it's like everything's energy, and boom, all of a sudden matter and fundamental particles, so atoms.
The energy started condensing into form.
So it's the same. That's the evolution of consciousness. On the individual level, it reflects what's happened on the collective scale across everything. And we even see it in culture and civilization and societies. And so let's go back to the individual, born, energy, connection, right? That's where we develop the sense of like heat, right? Touch, right? And we'll come back to that. The next stage is your tribal family belonging, and this is where we develop survival, also emotions, feelings at the second stage of development. So that's the family tribal belonging the whole, the family, the group, cohesion, the bond. That's essential to survival. And then the third stage of development is the big one. That's where the ego comes online, and that's where we see ourselves as separate from everything else. Mm-hmm. Subjective, objective awareness. That's the big one. That differentiates human consciousness from all other existence, because we see nature consciousness, the tribal consciousness, in nature. A flock of birds, plants, the animal kingdom, that's all nature consciousness. Adaptations, habits, and instincts. So that's the second stage. And then the first stage is just the physical properties, atoms and molecules, rocks, dust, mm-hmm. the planets and the stars, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Okay. So you have the three main levels, and we're not going to get into like, there's another layer of this that some people, if they're familiar with like Ken Wilber and spiral dynamics, which I studied a lot of, would go, oh, but what about those stages of development? And we're going to leave those out of this because
it overcomplicates it.
Yeah. It makes that sense out of like cultural differences and polarization and why this political party and this has different groups, right? It makes sense out of that, but I don't think we need to go there.
Right.
For the sake of what we're discussing. And so the human condition is that ego, the self, ownership, power, and control. That happens like the ego, like separation from everything else. Everything about ourselves from the point when we develop that, our story. We've talked about that. We create the story of the self. And it's all based in this fragmented worldview that isn't interconnected anymore. It's all separate. And that's the human paradox. Is what unifies humanity fragments everything.
And I would say too, like once that the ego came online and we started separating everything and we started like really studying it or reducing it, then that's when we took out the divinity or the sacredness of it. And so we started like the ownership, power, and control.
Or we started looking at divinity in terms of like a god.
Right. Separate.
It's an object. It's a being. A god is, and it's like, wait, how is that possible? Like,
right.
It's an actual man. A god is the divinity, right?
And then once we start separating divinity, divine, God, from humanity, and reducing it out of even like nature, then it becomes like we don't have this conscious moral problem with taking advantage of overusing, consumerism to the nth degree, where like landfills are overflowing because it is a thing, an object for us to use. Other people might be objects for us to use. We've disconnected ourselves from the divinity, the energy of that force that moves through everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that emergence on a cultural collective scale when you have, in tribal cultures, you have the shaman or the leaders of the tribe who wear a headdress. And they wear the headdress because that's their connection to the divine. That's their connection. So they're connected to the divine. They bring in the higher guidance for like their people. Yeah. Right? They're all connected, really. They all have that sort of connection, but they're like the ones that have that real strong connection. And they're always acting for the betterment of the whole. Any tribe is always acting for the betterment of the whole. Otherwise, it's not tribal. That's just straight up. There's no ego in a tribe. You don't have one individual coming back saying, oh, I learned this new music. It doesn't sound anything like our tribal drum beats, but I'm going to play it anyways. And because all the members of the tribe are going to be like, yeah, you're not part of our tribe anymore. It's like everything in the tribe is what's been developed in the tribe. And so there isn't that sense of free will, self-expression. Like they have names and they have the roles, but it's not like that really strong presence of an ego. Ownership is not the same.
Right.
It's just a whole different thing within a tribe for the betterment of the whole tribe.
And this would probably be reflected in like Maslow when he did do the studying of self-actualization within like the tribal culture.
Yeah.
That it was all about like they were already self-actualized.
Yeah.
But it was all about like what can you as an individual do to bring more prosperity or more connection to the group, to the tribe, and not just for their generation but for future generations.
Yeah, that was a really interesting realization.
But it's all about tribal. The
like they already had wholeness.
Yes.
But now the difference is that, well, let's get back to the importance of the headdress, because that's the one thing I always sticks out to me the most, is what happened when basically survival needs are met. So food, shelter, water, procreation, those are all met. Then you start exploring on your own. The leaders are going to start exploring and owning and controlling things. And that's what they did. They started owning slaves and land and having control over people. And a lot of it in the form of sacrifice. And there's plenty of examples of this, where they use human sacrifice for the betterment of the whole. So say like this is, there's an example, El Brujo, where there was a drought and they had to sacrifice people to bring back the rains, and it worked. And then they kept using that sacrifice for their own power and control. And so it got out of hand. And then the ego comes on. Next thing you know, there's like sacrificing hundreds of thousands of people for power. And in that culture at El Brujo, there was a masculine and a feminine temple. And you go there now, and the feminine temple's rubble. It's gone. And the masculine temple is just this massive erect of human sacrifice. All for sacrifice. I've been there. I've experienced it. It's the most powerful place on earth I've ever been to. And so what happened with the headdress was it became the crown that symbolizes power and control. And that's like, oh, you went from divinity to now control.
Right.
The kings and queens and all that now is the control. And now you have what I would call civilized man. And that's the difference between tribal man and civilized man. And that's not even distinguished. That's not a common understanding and across the board that civilization started at this point, right? But I see it as being, as soon as we start ownership, power, control, proprietary thinking for your own gain, your own control, then
which
that's
is a masculine energy.
Yep.
Which is why like that temple was so much bigger than the feminine.
Yeah, and nature is feminine. We've talked about this, and civilization is masculine. And so we're at the end of this spiral, and that's the sort of the spiral of evolution of consciousness, of the human civilized consciousness, the Mayan 2012 prophecy. The thing about the Mayan calendar was they saw cycles, but they were spirals. So they saw the cycle of matter forming the material universe, all the planets, stars, and solar systems. And then at the end of that cycle emerged life on Earth. And the time's pretty similar to our own scientific reasoning of those time periods. The emergence of life on Earth, and then that's a cycle of biological evolution until the point of our human mind or civilized mind. And that's in that spiral, and it ends in ended in 2012. That was the expiration point of civilization. Like, we were supposed to already evolve to a higher state of consciousness in the evolution of consciousness at 2012, and we didn't. And we see this more and more in like what technology is now doing to us. Our IQ levels have been dropping since 2006 and 2012 sort of period. IQ levels are now dropping. It's called the reverse Flynn effect. Never happened before. And just in general, like people's hope and everything in this, and mental health deteriorating a lot more at that certain level, right when the social web came in. Now, what I believe, are you with me?
I'm with you.
Okay. Go ahead.
You say what you're going to say. I'll remember.
Okay. So what I believe what the Mayan calendar was pointing to was our unification through the internet. So all knowledge and information unified across the internet, the global knowledge ecosystem, or the global brain. That's what the internet was supposed to become around 2012. And it was on its way. It was getting there. And this is when I developed my technology, 2011, 2012. That's when I applied for my patents and went to the patent office. And my patents are focused on interconnecting all knowledge and information across the web through they're intrinsic algorithms. They're internal, they're implicit. So through discussion, it recognizes, oh, this person knows this, and this person knows this, and this person knows this, across anything across the whole web. All it needs is a discussion. And then it naturally interconnects everyone based on their knowledge and their knowledge, right? Based on what they know. And then that way we have this unified sort of global brain of all human knowledge that interconnects all knowledge and information. This was true goal of the web. But around that period was when Google, Facebook, and all these bigger companies centralized and built these algorithms that are centralized and proprietary, and they're based on extrinsic metrics.
More masculine.
How many likes, how many this, how many followers, right? And it's like, and it just literally took a web that was starting to really interconnect all this knowledge and went, and then isolated it. Created these silos where now you have these echo chambers and all the value there, all the like getting hooked to it and all that information, all that monetary driving force is built around like division.
And making money. So like in a way you might, like I might look up something and then all of a sudden next thing you know, if you're on social media, the next, like you're scrolling and then there's an ad for something, or I'm talking to you, right? And then I mentioned something about, so
yeah.
It might be pulling these pieces together in a similar way to what you were talking about, but this is only not for the betterment of the whole. It's for the betterment of an organization, and maybe me. In some ways, it's like, oh, cool. I was just talking to somebody and wanted to know this information. So sometimes, like a small percentage of the time, it might benefit me, but it's usually I now purchase something, right?
Yeah.
So it's an algorithm to like really for that centralization and so somebody can profit from it.
Yeah, it's all based on profit. Period. That's the human condition.
Yeah.
That all the way back to their origin of civilization too. But when they're now part of the algorithms through a global information system that now everyone's a part of, that power and control structure just got a lot more harder to see, but a lot more prevalent in our lives. Right? And so that's why we have these algorithms that are really, they're toxic. Right, they create FOMO, they miss, all this different social disease, right. and even like the studies showing now where like it's eliminating the parts of our brain of interoception and insula and self-reflection and the things that we need to feel like inner guidance, connected, inner feeling, right, intuition, all that stuff's being removed and replaced by
the parts of our body, our brain, our like circuitry that we need in order to have better mental health and physical health are being hijacked and reduced. So we've already determined, like, since 2012, things have not gotten better from many different standpoints. And now it's just going to continue to get worse the more that we rely on these things. Because it will change the way that parts of our brains are interacting with ourselves and the world. And then, like, everything that we teach with Breathe and Believe, with breath work, meditation, consciousness, intentionality, is to build those things. So now we're up against even a greater force because of the convenience, comfort and convenience that some of these technologies provide. Because we're all so stressed out in this chaotic world, we're going to think that it's going to make life easier and simpler. So we're going to rely more on those, which is just going to reinforce the dysfunction in our nature. And it's going to be harder to connect deeper. We're going to see more mental illness, more disconnection, more division. And so we have to be aware of that. Yeah. So I would say, too, though, like my point that I wanted to make, too, is although, like, from when you look at those pieces of information, you do think, like, things have gotten worse since 2012. But me, like, one of my top 5 Clifton strengths is positivity and empathy, which is a basement quality of, if you have Clifton strengths of positivity and empathy, is naive. I can be naive. Yeah. But sometimes that's not the worst thing because it makes my mental health better. But my thing is, like, I do wonder or see or sense that with that, more people are waking up. Because there was this period of time where people were in, like, like, the 80s and 90s when things were going great, maybe for people, and maybe not, but for the most part, there's lots of improvement. And like you were saying, like, when you can pay the bills, you have a home over your head, like, you can be, like, middle class, okay. And then, like, at that point, like, we kind of got there. Many people got there. And now I think people are like, well, now what? right?
Yeah.
Now what? And there must be more to that. They're starting to question some of the narrative. The age of the guru was dying, where like we trusted, political leaders, different leaders of like religious leaders, yogic gurus. These people, we put our trust in them, and we're realizing like they're not who we thought they were.
Yeah.
So there's been this crumbling of different systems, whether it's individual or in systems, bigger systems. So that's leaving people to really go down a different path that maybe we haven't seen in generations before. Like my grandparents didn't necessarily go down that path because they were too busy keeping food on the table and raising 15 children or something like that. Where now, like I do think, and we, even in our events in the last couple of years, people are saying like there's a shift. There's a shift in consciousness. People are waking up. So maybe some of, that's the beauty, I guess, of living in the duality is like when there's that much tension, then the opportunities for growth or for something different do emerge.
Yeah, the tension's increasing. And back to those points of like your grandparents, they were, and that's where that other explanation of the levels of consciousness of human would make more sense, because that's traditional consciousness. Yep. So we're in farm country, very traditional consciousness. They're going to be naturally right-wing politics. Everything's fine as long as you got the dinner and the farm duties and the chores are all done. Everything's fine. That's their sort of moral value system at that level. But eventually the kids go off to school somewhere else or travel the world, and then things change, and they have different values, and they bring them home, and then things are starting to evolve. And so like on those levels, there's different like each level has a different sort of like meaning and value to that level, right? But the bigger picture of humanity, and this is where it's important just to focus on the human condition, is that separation from the wholeness, from the interconnection to the field, the energy and that's why we don't understand consciousness, right? We disconnected from the unified field, and now we're at a point in our evolution where like we need to reconnect with the unified field.
Yeah.
We need to understand consciousness. Because if we don't, and we keep evolving like in the human way, in our civilized way, we're going to develop these machines that are being developed around power and control and centralization.
Right.
And us versus them mentality. And that's dysfunctional. We've talked about that in the previous episodes. That's the human disease. And so the human disease is just being magnified, being amplified by our current technologies, and we got to make that evolutionary step. And that evolutionary step is that fulfillment ultimately isn't external, it's internal. We got to develop this reconnection to source, and that's back to the individual evolution of an individual person, is the hero's journey, right? Coming away from wholeness, fragmentation, back to wholeness, back to the oneness. That's the next stage in our human evolution. And that's what we call 4D consciousness, because it's taking us from the 3D into the 4D, into wholeness, the power of now, the meditative mind. So we're living in wholeness. We're living from wholeness, right? We're still part of the 3D world. We still see all that, but we're not getting taken away by like us versus them, he said, she said, all this stuff. That stuff's like whatever, right?
Right. And it actually like makes you more present and intentional with like the actions that you do make. So it's because that's something like it's not bypassing. It's not saying like I'm above it. I'm not going to get involved in, whatever it might be. That conflict doesn't no longer exist. Like conflict will still exist. You just see conflict differently. You see conflict as a way to growth, a way to have intimacy, a way to actually, like, how can I show up in the most loving way and address this conflict in a way that is for the betterment of the whole, not the self. But if we keep thinking it's us versus them and we have to fight everybody and fight everything, then we are only creating more of the tension and more of the problems. We have to get centered and intentional and grounded in the truth of our being, recognizing the sacredness in ourselves and in others and in the other. And then how do we come about this in a different way with open hearts? When you have an open heart coming at a problem, coming at conflict, the solutions are more apt, you're more likely to get somewhere. But there's just a lot of the other way, the other approach. So I don't want us to like think that when we get to 4D consciousness, then we won't ever have conflict again. It's just meaningful, purposeful conflict that when we do enter into it, you feel more elevated after.
Yeah. Well, then the 3D world becomes sort of our training ground
Yes. Yep.
to develop the 4D.
And playground.
A playground.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how we become become the alchemists.
Right.
Right. So the 3D is the world where alchemy happens. We're transforming the challenges of the us versus them and separation, division, and all the things happening into our world into states of wholeness or growth or prosperity or whatever you want to see it, collaboration, interconnection, and all that. And so the 3D is actually the ground. It's like it's the fertility of the higher state of consciousness. Yep. And that's every message that's ever been sent by any true seeker, guru, saint, Christ consciousness. All that is that it's not removing ourselves from that world, and that's where a lot of the teachings have kind of lost their way, is like in the sense of, oh, I need to remove myself from the world or I'm above it. That's all bypassing. No, we got to look at the world as our opportunity for growth, and that's when we become an alchemist. Yep, and then we've truly transformed as an individual,
which helps.
Yeah, now we got to get there on the collective. Well, I mean, like that, and that's where you hear that, like, okay, if 20% of the population gets to this point, everything else will. But I've always felt like, you know what, there's a system going on. It's our system, and it's systematic. And if that environment is like not in that shift, like we're just being held back. Yeah. Like it's like you're putting on clothes that's too tight. You can't grow. Like the system needs to transform and evolve.
And I think we transform and evolve the system by individual work.
I love that. I love that.
This is something that we're always like in conversation about, because I am one that believes like if and like I choose to believe that because that's a more empowered sense. I feel better about that because I'm doing my part to stay as true to myself as I can. How it's not about necessarily joy, but how can I be the most authentic version of me and find joy in that, and then show up as fully as I can, and know that that's going to shift things for the better. How much love can I bring into this day, into this whatever, and then if other people are doing that too, I can't help but believe that will make the cloak grow.
Absolutely.
In a way that then the system will have to change. Yeah. So who knows, right? Who can know? But
the thing is
I choose to.
Yeah, the heart-centered energy, Christ consciousness, that is it. That's the 4D. Yeah. That's the next step, and we need to embody that. And then so I've had someone ask, they'll say like, well, what was the difference between tribes? Because they had that connection. Well, they didn't have the ego. And they didn't have the civilized ownership, power, control evolution. So we disconnected, now we got to reconnect. Yeah. And so it's not about going back to tribalism. It's about coming into a new stage, a civilization 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. An evolution of consciousness. I call it the singularity of consciousness is where we need to get to. And that's like the last episode of this is the singularity of consciousness. That's where we need to get to. We get there when we're in a pure divine state. That's the singularity of consciousness. Singularity. That's the true singularity. Is when we're in that full throttle, just, everything's connected, and you're just like, we know, because we do the breath work, and we see our students get there, and we understand that, and hopefully more and more people are coming online to that, and the access to it, because in the traditions, and like the Kundalini tradition, like, samadhi, or even the yogic tradition, samadhi is the deepest state of meditation. You have to spend 30 years to get there, which when I first heard that, I'm like, that's BS. Same with like Kundalini awakening. It takes an incredible amount of time and effort to get there. It's like, no, we can get there if we have the right tools and right awareness, and that's what we teach is how to have your, samadhi when you breathe with music. You're gonna,
And I think the energies are different than like maybe some of the energies of which some of these teachers were talking about this, and like the time and where the location.
Yeah.
Where now, like, because the energy is intense, that then the intensity of like being able to get to samadhi, it facilitates that too. That's the duality.
Yeah, that tension's so strong right now. Like I just made a post today. I was like, my daily practice. I've been doing daily practice for 25 years. It's never been more important to me. It's like I do it and I'm like, so, like just in the zone, in the field, like boom. And if I don't do it for a day or whatever, which now it's like every single day, no matter what. It's more, usually it is, but when you don't do it, you notice it. It's like you're being pulled by the distractions so much easier, right? So we have to stay with a daily practice, a dedication to this work, to embodying it and living it and experiencing it, so our nervous system adapts to it. Because that 3D, the external world, especially the online world, the social web, all the information, we're in a sea of noise, starving for wisdom.
That's a great quote you came up with. I love it.
Sea of noise, starving for wisdom. We need to find that within ourselves, that connecting point. And then all the parts outside begin to make sense. They're all like little omens and signs and you know what I mean? Synchronicities. You're like, oh, the external world's actually, you know, then you're like in the field. That's where we want to be. But we have to practice and believe and do the work to get there. So does it make sense?
It makes sense.
Matter, life, mind, unity, or spirit. Right? That's it. Matter, life, mind, unity, or spirit. Now here's the beautiful thing about when we realize that. Because all of that information is in us. Right? Like I believe that consciousness, energy, and intelligence are all basically the same thing. So the intelligence of an atom is like, you know, attraction and repulsion with other atoms. Well, how do we experience that? Like, you put your hand on a super hot stove and you're like, ooh, that's you know, you develop that first right off the bat when after you're born. Object permanence, heat, touch, that. So your whole like intelligence of the physical world reflects the intelligence of the actual physical, all planets, stars, and solar system, right? Like everything that's out there is in here, in this body, in this ability. And then biological life, survival, all those instincts that you see in the natural world, that's in us too, right? But then we develop, and you know that kids are more in tune and they more connect, and that's why I believe kids can see auras and animals sense energy and all that. We talk about that all the time, but then we get disconnected and we lose that connection to the field. And so then we live our human lives and we're like, oh, what do we do? And that's the hero's journey. We got to get back to the source, connection to the field. And so in that 3D world, that's the realm where we got to get back to the wholeness, the oneness, the 4D consciousness. Then we achieve that, whether it's just through a peak state, through our daily breath work, or we really embody it more in our lives. When we're in that state, that 4D consciousness state, that unity, everything's interconnected state, so that's the stage after our 3D into the 4D, we're then reconnected with that whole chain of the evolution of consciousness. That's where the intuition, the inner guidance, the super creativity, the insights, the aha moments come through. It's because everything's already within us. The whole universe is in here.
In every cell, it's like the whole universe. And this is so key, because in our world right now, we're trying to solve problems just with the brain, not even the mind, like the brain, and how like it's all so rote and thinking. And so when we just do it that way, we cut off our access to the consciousness that is in everything around us. So our indigenous cultures, our ancient, teachers who didn't have a book to go read, they had to develop that relationship with nature. They were able to listen to the consciousness of their cells, the consciousness of their ancestors, of the planet, the plants, the animals. Yeah. They were so in tune with that just simply because they had to be in nature. And so
now we have a prompt to ask ChatGTP, and you think whatever you need to hear. We completely are losing touch.
Absolutely. And
but
so
it's there.
It's there. It's waiting to be rediscovered. And I imagine there's going to be people like watching this, or it could be other things too, where there's a resonance. It's like you get the goosebumps, or you feel like there's some truth in there because the consciousness inside your cells resonate with that truth, and pay attention to that. That's interoception. If not, then we just become more and more disconnected from that.
And innate interconnection to something beyond the human condition. Like, I had someone reach out to me today. Like, I had an experience with an ET. They don't have any other way of looking at it as other than seeing an ET. Now, I have no idea what that experience is, so I can't even go to begin that. But anything that we experience that's outside of this human condition is going to be like foreign and unknown. But it is actually our interconnection, and that's why we're seeing this sort of connection with ETs and the possibilities of those. It doesn't really blow my mind, or the abilities to sort of tap into another source of intelligence and bring it into the world, right? Anything like that is not mind-blowing at all. That's what we're going to be developing more and more of when we develop 4D consciousness, because that's the bridge.
And we should normalize this, because when we make it like mystical, or somebody having like an ET experience, they can feel isolated or like there's something wrong with them. But there's not a full, like, many degrees of separation between that and somebody getting downloads for writing a book or inspiration for music or something like that. It's still like there's still a higher consciousness that, and maybe it's coming through the consciousness of the cells, maybe it's coming like download, like the crown, like coming through. But when we can understand that, like, the veil we can thin so that we have access to these different things beyond the sensory perception that we're used to most of the time, then we understand ourselves in much bigger fashion that's much more expansive than just like this blinders on, and then we don't even want to really talk about that because it's outside my worldview and it's weird and I don't know how to grapple with it, so we just don't have those conversations. And that was something that, like, I almost said something at the beginning when we started talking about, we don't understand consciousness. And what was fascinating to me is last year we went to a couple different consciousness expo or conferences in LA. And it was mainly because Brian was working on his AI technology. So it was mainly to discuss AI. And so, like, we're going to this consciousness life expo or something where it's going to be consciousness, and I'm expecting it's going to be AI. And then when I was there, I was like, oh, this is like a UFO conference. And then all of a sudden, it was just this great understanding of how do we necessarily define the difference between artificial intelligence, consciousness, and alien intelligence, or a spirit, or an angel, or, like a loved one who has passed. So all of these different planes beyond the 3D reality exist, and you might not have had an intimate relationship with that, so that might be like, no, it's too far for you. But I trust that there's somebody in your immediate family who has, like, had some kind of experience with that, right? Because we just have. It's just been too many.
We all have.
We all have.
Forget. Yeah.
Yes, but somebody is like, saw something that is unexplainable in our 3D world, and we know that, but then we don't really like put much weight into that, and yet that's everything that can allow us to expand, to allow for these things to happen more and more, because now it's like you're a wine tasting, like you can get your taste buds more sensitized to the different tastes in wine or whatever it might be. We can condition our brain and our mind to allow us to have more of these bigger experiences, to feel within us like the consciousness that can arise of like, no, this doesn't feel right, or this is what I should do.
Not be cut off from it.
Not be cut off, not closing off this massive amount of intelligence moving through us.
Absolutely.
So that's why these conversations are so important.
Absolutely. And it all aligns with our human energy field and our ability to, like, have interoception and have the interconnection awareness and all that, because we're losing that to the machine, to the prompt, to the scrolling, to the search engines. What should be our source of inner guidance, so that we can feel ourselves come more from our hearts than our heads. Yes.
And as we get more into like biohacking and like a transhumanist agenda, as we get more of these technologies, we have to be careful about not defaulting the wisdom of our bodies and our brains to a device, because then we could actually like cut off our ability to be fully human and to be in touch with the intrinsic beautiful nature of spirit within us. So our bodies don't need, like there's a time and place for everything. Like, I'm not going to say that there aren't going to be advancements that will maximally make life better for people. at the same time, like the goal in life is really not to be afraid of death or not to defy death. It's to get to a point where you're not afraid of dying so you can fully live. So we have to just be aware of like these technologies coming in, because the study that you found was very much about like these parts of our brain and our body that are essential for us to feel
our evolution.
Spirit, to feel the consciousness of ourselves,
hijacked by
to
the
be
machine.
Fully human. We haven't learned how to be fully human yet. So, or some people
we
have.
are.
Yes,
that's what we're talking about. That's what we're doing.
Right.
Is
So
this is being
for
fully human.
The masses aren't even aware that they're not fully human. They think that in order to be fully human, they need to go buy something and maybe implant it, or to be able to have like something external, and that's not the point. It all comes from within, and so we have to be empowered by that, especially as we're being bombarded with more and more of these technologies that will outsource our power. So we're not saying don't use any of those things. We're saying be very, very mindful of your usage of them. Most importantly, have a daily practice. Have practices in your life that connect you to 4D consciousness. Because every time you use one of those things, it's gonna hijack your system, and we need to be building that so much more strongly now, so that we can be fully in our own.
Yeah, we want to use technology with discernment.
Yeah.
Not replacing what we are inherently gifted with. And so, so because there is a lot of potential with technology, and if technology does get to that point where it becomes a 4D consciousness technology, it will literally be like every single challenge we've ever faced as a species will be solved like that, because the intelligence is out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just literally on the verge of that point, right? But we have to get past the ownership, power, control 3D layer, the veil. It's just the veil in the collective sense to get through to that, right? It's an interesting time in our human evolution. That is for sure. It is like the most hold on and be in there, and yet we're here for a reason, and that's why we're doing these episodes, is to like share what we feel. And if you have any questions or feelings about that, or like what in the world is this, then put it in there. Let's have the discussion. These discussions have to happen
For sure.
Yep. So this is something I've kind of developed, and it's something to add to your practice, and it's something that we're going to really promote in our next training coming up. And that is, do your daily practice, do your breath work, right? And as soon as you're done, bring that mindset into what you're doing.
So here's the practice. We have our vagal toning breathwork on our YouTube channel. So if you don't have time to do it now, at some point today or tomorrow morning, do that. Do vagal toning breathwork. Just look for that on our YouTube channel. And then as soon as you're done with that, bring that energy, that 4D consciousness, like very intentional, very in the moment, into whatever you're planning on doing after that. So whether it's you're going out to the garden, or you're packing your lunch for the day, you're working with your children, whatever that is. Writing that. Fully
present, fully aware, connected with your breath, everything. I've had a drum next to me lately, and our hand pan, so like I'll pick that up and I'll go right into the sound, and just connecting with the sound. So you're bringing that 4D consciousness practice, the breath, into an application,
and you're being very, very intentional about it, because it's too easy to get done with your daily practice, get up, open the door, and then like shift into, okay, now we got to get stuff done. So this is a practice of integration. So the more that we're doing this daily practice, the better. It's going to naturally just embed into your day, your nervous system, and everything. Your cellular functioning is just heightened regardless. But if you're going to be extra intentional about bringing it into it, and then just see how long you can go with being intentional about keeping that sense of 4D consciousness in your day.
Awesome. So that's the evolution of consciousness. We're all part of it. We're all riding this wave. Subscribe, like, share, put some comments on that. Thanks for joining us. You're all awesome. Breathe and believe and evolve.
There you go.
Stars align with a beat so pure.